Thanks to all of you for being here. It's great to see so many people in the room, so thanks for that. So what I wanted to really talk about was the fact that the work that we do in the Supportive Care and Quality of Life Subcommittee is not just focused on the drugs, that we're interested in the entire experience of someone who has a diagnosis of cancer, and that's right through from the point at which you're diagnosed and start to make some treatment decisions, through to the supportive care that you might need at different times during your treatment and afterwards. So it's about the quality of life that you're experiencing and not just the quantity. We want to make sure that you're living longer, but also that you're living better and more healthy lives, able to do the sorts of things that are important to you as well in that time. So we know that there are lots of different side effects that people can experience from the cancer diagnosis that they have, the cancer itself, and also the treatments that we deliver to you. So it's really important that we start to take heed of these things and really provide some support and information and interventions that help overcome some of these sorts of things, because we certainly don't want you to be having to live with them without additional support. So the kinds of work that we do are clinical trials, but in the supportive care space. So the sorts of studies that Shomik spoke about just now were the different medical treatments. We might use sometimes drugs to help with some of those side effects, but a lot of what we do is what I would call behavioural research. So helping you cope psychologically or changing your physical activity behaviours to try and increase your quality of life and reduce the symptoms that you're experiencing as part of that process. So what I wanted to do was really just give you a quick tour of some of the projects that have come out of the Quality of Life and Supportive Care Subcommittee, and particularly focused on those that are funded by the Below the Belt Pedalathon fundraising activities, so that you can kind of see how much the effort of the group and the people who are involved, how much of that is going back directly into the research that we do. And I'd have to say that sometimes it's a little bit harder for us to get funding for the kinds of studies that we do, because they often don't include drugs, and they're a little bit more complicated in some respects, because it's about behaviours and changing lifestyles rather than targeting molecular components of disease or the drugs. So we do struggle sometimes to get funding for these things. So I wanted to particularly show you that we're doing studies right through from the point at which you're making the decision. So how do you make decisions about the treatment that you might have? And so in this particular study, the group, and I have to thank Orlando for these slides, who are developing and piloting an informed decision-making aid for men with localised prostate cancer. And what we know is that question prompt lists can be really helpful in helping individuals decide what questions they want to ask, the information that they need to have, and they can improve their participation in decision making, the recall of information that they have after they've made a decision, and also to sometimes reduce the anxiety that they might be experiencing related to making that decision. And question prompt lists and decision aids can both be very effective and helpful, but they need to, but question prompt lists are a bit easier to implement rather than decision aids sometimes. So in this study, our colleagues developed printed and online versions of a question prompt list so that clinicians and men could access these things when they're making the decisions about what treatments they might want to have. And in the second stage, they're actually looking at whether men would prefer to have printed information or to have that available online, and how acceptable the information and the questions were to both men and clinicians, and also how feasible is it for us to use this particular tool in practice. So at the moment, what they're doing is recruiting 30 men who are having biopsies for localised prostate cancer from urologists in private urology clinics in a couple of places in New South Wales, and using it with them. So they've audited the resources. They've come up with 58 questions, which seems like a lot, but most people don't ask all of those questions, but it might give you an idea of the breadth and the differences in questions that people do want to ask. They've had feedback from a multidisciplinary team of clinicians who treat men with this disease, and then they've brought that down to 26 questions and a one-page information brochure. So it kind of gives you an idea about the extensive development process that goes into making a really good information resource for men and other patients as well. So this will give you a bit of an idea about what it looks like, and the online version, which you can see there in an app-based form. So at the moment, they're going through ethics and governance approval, so making sure that they have all of the processes in place to allow them to do this study, and we'll start to actually finalise the question prompt list and really finish recruiting the men by the end of this year, so that we can complete and analyse these results and disseminate the resource if it's a useful one as well. But it's been supported fully by the Below the Belt Research Fund, so it's a fantastic piece of work for our members and for the men who are making decisions about these kinds of treatments. Some of the other work that we do is also looking about the experience of taking part in the clinical trials that we run. So in this particular study, which was again funded by an ANZUP Allied Health and Nursing Fellowship that was also co-supported by one of the pharmaceutical companies, we were really looking at trying to describe the experience of what it's like for patients to take part in an ANZUP clinical trial. And this is what we call a qualitative study. So here we're actually interviewing people and asking them about their direct experience, what it's like for them, and using that information to guide us about how we might make that process better and to better support people in their decision making. So in this we were wanting to explore and describe the experience of people taking part in that clinical trial and learning about the different, what it was like for them when they were learning about a clinical trial, how the consent process was and how they found that information and what it was like having to make that decision, as well as a number of other things. And we also wanted to understand what their perceptions of how cancer treatment experience might be in a clinical trial compared to usual care or other medical care they might have received, and to ask them for any ideas or suggestions that they have about how we might improve that participant experience or coming into a clinical trial. Can we actually make that better for people, make it easier for them to access and make decisions about taking part? So that study is currently in progress, and we'll be analysing those results over the next few months. So maybe next year we'll be able to tell you what we found as part of that as well. Another of the projects that we've done have really been to develop an exercise guide for men with advanced prostate cancer, and I think this is a really interesting process. You hear a lot about exercise activity in the community at the moment, and again another Below the Belt project, but what they've done is really taken a very structured approach to this, developed this web-based physical activity guidance tool for men with prostate cancer, and they've drawn on the experts of people all across Australia who work with men with prostate cancer and the patients themselves to understand what the experience is like and work out how we might actually increase access to that kind of high quality multidisciplinary exercise support. And using the funding from Below the Belt, have actually developed a whole series of algorithms to help men to prescribe exercise interventions much more effectively and efficiently to men. So to be able to tailor that information to your activity levels and to your interest and the kinds of things that you like to do. And in doing that, we hope that it means that we're providing much better support for all of you and helping you to make decisions about how you would change your lifestyle for some of these things in an important way. And what we're doing at the moment is really looking at whether people find this a usable approach. So we've developed the website and the algorithms and the information. But when men are exposed to it, are they actually able to use it? Do they find it helpful, or do they find it just too confusing and not very engaging? So what we're actually asking is, at the moment, 10 men, what their experience of using the program is. So we bring them into the lab and we step you through that process so that we can ask what it's like to use the program. Did you find that that the advice was appropriately tailored to you and your situation? And can you follow the kinds of exercise videos that we're using and those kinds of things? And we're going on once that information has been analysed and the web-based program refined, to really start to see whether or not we can change people's lifestyle activities and their physical activity levels in a phase 2 study. The other program that's running at the moment as well is another about why men leave active surveillance for non-clinical reasons. So we know that some men are able to maintain or to live without having surgery or any other intervention for a while if they have very low risk prostate cancer. But lots of the time it's difficult for people to want to stay in that program, and we'd really like to understand much more about that so that we can again provide better support and information and interventions to make sure that we're minimising the amount of medical treatment that people have where it may not be necessary. So that's a study that's getting underway at the moment, where we'll be again interviewing, doing a cohort study, so looking at men from cancer registries and tracking their experience and interviewing them about the decisions that they make and what changes for them to make them want to have an active intervention when previously they'd started on an active surveillance program. And the last study that I'll mention is another, again, funded by the Below the Belt Research Fund, but it's an exercise medicine intervention before people have radical cystectomy for bladder cancer. And it was a pilot randomised controlled trial, and this is actually going on to be developed into a larger grant application at the moment, so that's under review right now, which is great to see how these smaller projects are then leading to something else that's bigger. So here we know that sometimes that pre-surgical exercise suggests that it might increase the physical or physiological reserve or your capacity to cope with the changes that come about as a consequence of surgery. And sometimes we can take advantage pre-surgically of some of the waiting times that we might have to have, and the fact that when you're in this situation waiting for a change in waiting for your surgery or just after diagnosis, that you might actually be a little bit more open to changing some of the physical activity levels that you've experienced in the past. And so what we're interested to do is to see if we can get people's physical activity levels up a little bit and try and maintain that at a higher level so they don't lose quite as much function when they have their surgery. So in this particular study, what the researchers did was to really look at the preliminary effect of and feasibility of this approach to exercise in patients who are about to have this particular type of surgery, and to see whether or not we could see some reduction in the decline in people's functional, so whether they were able to walk as far, whether they maintained their muscle mass and things like that more effectively if they had access to the pre-surgery exercise intervention. And really to look at some of those sorts of things. So that again is a study that's in progress, but it looks promising enough to sort of take it through to another process, another larger study, really is what I'm getting at. And really just to thank you again all for being here, and what we're kind of really about is trying to make it a much better experience for you right from the beginning to the end of the process, and better supportive care interventions. So I'll stop there. Thanks.